Hello everyone. For today's topic, I wanted the video to be about this Axios article that was just published a few days ago back on May 1st, 2026, in which Axios reported the Democrats' plans for the 2028 redistricting cycle, in which Democrats plan to counteract and fight back against the Republican gerrymanders that are occurring because the VRA Section 2 has been struck down by the United States Supreme Court. So as you go down in this article, you can see that it mentions this is a direct response to the Supreme Court ruling where they struck down and weakened the Voting Rights Act by specifically declaring Section 2 unconstitutional, in which Democrats admitted that the VRA ruling was a devastating blow to Democrats, primarily because of the multiple Democrat seats stuck in the hard conservative South in states such as Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia, notably having a large amount of black Democrats, part of the Democratic Black Caucus in Congress, being targeted by GOP gerrymandering redistricting that is rapidly occurring right now in response to Section 2 being struck down and in plans for the 2028 cycle, specifically for states like Mississippi, who already had their primary elections but want to get a ball moving for the 2028 cycle. Now, let's go back to this main article. It sort of goes state by state where they're talking about what plans Democrats have, starting with the state of Maryland. So a little bit of a history lesson, if you all remember and recall, back in the 2020 census and the 2021-2022 redistricting cycle, Maryland's Democrats actually passed an unconstitutional gerrymander where they nearly wiped out all of the conservatives and Republicans out of the state. The Maryland Supreme Court ended up striking this down as an illegal Democratic gerrymander, primarily because the moderate Republican governor at the time, Larry Hogan, appointed the majority of the Maryland Supreme Court, and the justices at the time found that a major Democrat gerrymander was unconstitutional, as they tried to remove nearly all of the competitive seats and, in some maps, try to wipe out all of the Republicans from Maryland completely. Now, for this year, there was a lot of drama because Maryland does have a 7-1 congressional delegation, and the Democrats in Maryland believe that they can gerrymander out the only Republican seat in the state of Maryland by diluting the conservative vote in Andy Harris's district, where he was the only Republican left in the state. However, this move hit a stone wall, as the Democrats in the Maryland House of Delegates ended up passing this measure in overwhelming numbers. When it reached the Democratic Senate in the state of Maryland, the Democrat Senate State President, Bill Ferguson, refused to bring the measure to a vote. And this article here by Politico actually goes through the reasoning that Bill Ferguson, the Democratic State Senate President, used as the reason for why he decided not to gerrymander. Now, he pointed out a few things that he wanted the Democrats to note in Maryland. If you look at the state of Maryland, he mentioned, specifically if you go to the partisan politics in the state of Maryland by going by the partisan voter index, you can see that there is already one somewhat competitive seat in Maryland's 6th district, and Maryland's 1st is the only Republican seat on the Eastern Shore, represented by Andy Harris. One of the reasons he gave for not gerrymandering was because he felt that some parts of the gerrymander could end up weakening some states where in a very, very bad election year for Democrats, they could actually end up losing more than just the one safe conservative seat that they have. The second thing that he pointed out was that the Maryland Supreme Court, as mentioned before, has already struck down a Democratic unconstitutional gerrymander, according to the state Supreme Court in Maryland, and he warned that if Democrats try to push a new map again, that the maps would be struck down once again by the somewhat conservative Supreme Court of Maryland, in which the majority of them were appointed by Republican Governor Larry Hogan. He also mentioned that if the map were to be struck down, that the justices could also find some unconstitutional boundaries in the current Maryland congressional delegation map. And finally, the other aspect that he mentioned was that he felt as though the Democrats within the state Senate actually weren't a clear consensus if they wanted to redraw or not, where he indicated that there are other members within the Maryland State Democratic Senate that did not want to pass and go forward with this gerrymander. And some of it could be because of the state's congressional black delegation, and within the state House and Senate, their black caucuses that they have within the Democratic Party. If you know anything about Maryland, you can see that 2 of their districts are actually a black majority district, one of the only few in the country where the plurality, if not the majority of the district, is African American. Now, starting off with Maryland's 7th congressional district, you can actually see that the majority of the demographics within the state are actually black, where 53.2% of the population happen to be African American, alongside 8.5% being Hispanic. So essentially all of the Democratic voting power within this district that covers most of Baltimore City, as you can see right here in the map, is directly caused by and voted by black voters, and they want to have their own black representative that they feel as though represents the black values and pushes their African American agenda forward. Notably, this is why they elected their own black representative, who was also a former president and CEO of the NAACP and a former congressional member from the same district way back when in the 80s. Going back to the districts in Maryland, you can actually see that Maryland's 4th Congressional District also has the same scenario, where this congressional district covers most of PG County, which is directly tied to the Washington, D.C. suburbs, and the population is actually even more African American, with 55.2% of the population within that district being black and a sizable amount being Hispanic as well. Henceforth, the Democrats have decided to elect their own black representative again in Glenn Ivey, once again because they feel that Glenn Ivey and a black representative would push their African America agenda forward and represent his constituents the best, because the vast majority of his constituents are African American. Presumably, this was one of the reasons that there were probably other fellow Democrats within the state of Maryland who did not want to go ahead with the gerrymander. If they were to gerrymander the state, they would need to draw out and stretch some of the congressional boundaries in Maryland. You can see here that if they wanted to get rid of this 1st district here on the eastern shore of Maryland, they would need to tie in and dilute a lot of the black votes out of Baltimore City and connect it all the way to the rural east coast of Maryland. And a lot of black Democrats don't like that, because they feel as though if you mix our black voters in a more competitive district and you don't have a black majority district, then they fear that their black representative might get primaried out, or they will lose their black representation and instead have a white Democrat take over their district if they do not have a significant majority of African Americans voting in their district. So presumably, these were some of the reasons that the Maryland Democratic Senate did not move forward. Not only because 1, it creates possible dangers for some safe seats, 2, that it was most likely going to be found unconstitutional and struck down by the state Supreme Court, and 3, they did not want to dilute the power of some of the black caucus within the state. However, this put a target on the back of the state's Senate President Bill Ferguson here, where Democrats are actually saying that he is probably going to have a primary challenge, and are mentioning that they want to see if he loses re-election, as he was the obstacle. So a lot of the more Democrat voters in the state are actually having plans to primary out the president and create a shift in the narrative to try to convince the Democrats in the Senate that because of the Republicans' gerrymander efforts, that they need to drop some of their main concerns and play ball against some of the Republicans who are already gerrymandering their states. And notably, because of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act being struck down, it's actually possible that the Maryland's small c conservative Supreme Court might not have any more of a constitutional basis to shut down the map, as some of the gerrymandering and anti-gerrymandering legislation passed in the Voting Rights Act was recently struck down in Section 2 being found as unconstitutional. So with that being said, where does that leave Maryland? I think that this article is correct, that it directly points to the Senate President Bill Ferguson. Will the Democrats be able to primary out their own Senate President? It would probably need to take a lot of convincing for some of the black caucus to be willing to dilute some of their voters and get rid of the Senate President and push this all to a vote. And if all of that were to happen, I can actually see a scenario where Democrats might be able to gerrymander the state even more and tie in some of the Baltimore City voter base into the Eastern Shore and get rid of the lone Republican left in the state of Maryland. And if that happens, and if all of those efforts do in fact pass and go through, Democrats can earn themselves just one single seat in the state of Maryland, because they already represent 7 of them and there was only 1 Republican left. Now, moving back to the article, we actually see that the next state here is Illinois. Now, you might be wondering, isn't Illinois already gerrymandered enough, just like the state of Maryland? Not actually, because if you actually go back to the state of Illinois here, you can see that there are a few Republican districts that remain in Illinois. Now, Illinois has 17 districts in total. However, out of the 17, there are only 3 Republican districts left. This is because of the 2021/2022 gerrymander. They ended up gerrymandering nearly all of Chicago into 12 different districts. So as you can see here on this map, there are 1, 2, 3 Republican districts. Now, one of these are somewhat on the suburbs of Chicago, but the other 2 are downstate in more rural Illinois. Now, they actually have a close-up here called Chicagoland, which shows a deep dive into Cook County, the city of Chicago, and the neighboring suburbs. You can count right here that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 Democrats districts that are all gerrymandered and pulling some of their black voters out of Chicago into the neighboring suburbs that are more white outside of Chicagoland. Now, the question here in this article is, what do the Democrats plan to do with Illinois? An up-and-coming Democrat from the state of Illinois, the one who actually just won his primary in a safe Democrat seat in November, Mr. Ford is actually saying that they cannot sit back and watch Republicans and the courts erode voter rights protections and do nothing. Quote unquote from Mr. Ford. He said that this puts us in a situation where we have to figure out a new way to approach. Other House Democrats from Illinois actually admitted that there is currently a 17-0 map that is out there, presumably implying that the Democrats might have a nuclear option where they try to go 17-0 and gerrymander all of the Republican seats that are left. However, there are two major roadblocks here, and that is one, as previously mentioned, the state is already extremely gerrymandered, where all of the Democrat votes seem to be coming from Cook County and Chicago, and they have already divided the city of Chicago and Cook County to 12 entirely separate districts, all represented by Democrats in safe margins, because they were able to dilute and evenly split the black vote across all of these districts, where there is a high enough amount of them to make sure that black Democrats get elected. That is the first obstacle, is that there might be deteriorating gains to see how far they can actually go with the gerrymandering. If you look at the picture here, you can see that a lot of these southern parts of Illinois, it'll be nearly impossible for them to draw in black voters from the tippity top of the state over here in Chicago all the way down to the bottom border of Illinois. Geographically, there are probably going to be a lot of limitations. Maybe in this one suburban district right here that's somewhat close to Chicago, they might have some options here to tie in some more black voters. Now, the second obstacle in Illinois is that there is actually a sizable amount of the Democrats on the congressional delegation that will not be in favor of a 17-0 measure or having that legislation pushed forward. And the reasoning behind this is that there is a significant amount of Illinois representatives that are all part of the state's Black Caucus and Black Congressional Group, where a lot of these representatives from the state you can actually see, because a lot of them are from the Chicago area because of the gerrymander that they already have. A lot of these representatives are actually elected by their constituents in majority black districts. You can see that Jonathan Jackson here is black. You can see that Robin Kelly here is black. You can see that Delia Ramirez is actually Hispanic, tied in a more Hispanic area and Latino area in the Chicago suburbs. Same thing goes for Troy Garcia, where he was in more of the Hispanic suburbs of Chicago. But if you go more down to Illinois' 14th, they have another black representative here, Lauren Underwood, who is also tied to the Chicago suburbs. So if you were to click any of these districts and go to the demographics, you can see once again that this is directly from the city of Chicago and Cook County, where the demographics and population is plurality black. And this is the same for a lot of these cases where they were able to elect their own black representatives. Now, the Black Caucus in the state thinks it's very important that their black population is able to have a majority opinion in a lot of these districts, or a plurality opinion as to who the Democrat primary nominee is going to be. They want to ensure that these voters who are black within these districts are able to choose a member of their own choice, presumably in most of these cases, black members, so they can best represent their constituents, as they are one of the plurality, if not the majority, of the ethnicity within their own district. So a lot of these Black Caucus members might speak a big game as to how they need to combat and fight these Republicans, but when it actually comes to dividing and diluting the entire black population even farther in the Chicagoland area, there's very limited options to how far they can go, or if they would actually be willing to do it, as it will split the black voter base drastically across the state, more than it already is. And even if they were able to go ahead with a new gerrymander, the most that they can reasonably expect to find is maybe one more gerrymander for this Republican district here that's somewhat close to the Chicago suburbs, where they might be able to tie in a bit more black or Hispanic voters to try and influence the vote out of Republicans' hands. Which really is the max extent I can see Illinois actually going. The chances of them actually going forward with a 17-0 map might be a possibility, but when push goes to shove, I think the reality of the situation is that Democrats in Illinois might be able to pick up one more seat. Now, all of the other states here on this list are actually in even more complicated positions. Now, New York, if you go to their recent elections, you can see that the state of New York only has a few Republican members left in Congress. They have Mike Lawler here, they have Nick LaLotta, and all the rest of the Republicans, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are in Republican seats that are somewhat lean or somewhat safe, where there is almost a guarantee that the Republicans will be represented in those districts. But you can see here, there isn't really much room for Democrats to improve. Michael Lawler will probably lose his election in November regardless, and Nick LaLauda already stands a chance to lose his election in November regardless. And a lot of these Democrat seats right here, the 19th, 17th, 18th, 4th, 22, the 6th, and the 20th, are all in the single digits for Democrats. So if there was another election where someone like Trump could do a 10-point shift across the entire state and make the margin of New York be close to within 10 to 12 percentage points, you can see that in a very bad year, if Democrats were to proceed with a gerrymander here, sure, they might actually get rid of some Republicans, but they might actually make even more seats more competitive. So if there was ever going to be a massive Republican red wave year, that could put those same Democrats in some sort of trouble. Now, that's not the only issue for New York, however. As they mentioned, that the state currently has a bipartisan redistricting commission. So in order for this to be passed, they will need to pass a constitutional amendment in the state for 2 separate sessions by the state legislature and put it on a public ballot initiative. So this is something that will take multiple years for New York. If they were to get the ball moving right now and try to pass it in their session, they might be able to see this in the 2028 elections, but this is really dead on arrival for 2026. And is completely reliant on a public ballot initiative in the state of New York, which will cost Democrats hundreds of millions of dollars in a safe Democrat state just to gerrymander out 2 to 3 more Republican seats, where they will probably win 2 to 3 more Republican seats anyway in the current Democrat environment. Arguably, the next best opportunity for Democrats is in the state of Colorado. Now, if you go to the state of Colorado, they actually have their own independent nonpartisan redistricting commission. Now, it mentions that Democrats are already working on securing a ballot initiative to redraw the state's congressional maps for 2028 and 2030, with a chance to pick up as many as 3 seats. Now, in order for Democrats to do this, as mentioned, they need to secure a ballot initiative and pass legislation within the state of Colorado, and probably spend hundreds of millions of dollars in order to pass the ballot initiative. Now, lucky for them, Colorado is a Democrat plus 15 state. It is very liberal, so they do actually stand a chance at redrawing some of the districts here. You can see here that Republicans have 1, 2, 3, 4 congressional districts in the state of Colorado, while Democrats have 4 as well. However, this is a Democrat plus 15 state, so you would actually think that the Democrats should have more of a majority. This is exactly what they're planning. As you can see, all of the Republican states are either even or in the single digits, whereas they have a Democrat vote sink in the 1st district. They could very easily make this competitive district, instead of a 50-50 chance for Democrats and Republicans, into a safe Democrat district, and choose to draw out 1 or 2 of the Republican plus 5 districts, represented by Jeff Hurd and Jeff Crank, into a nearly safe Democrat district as well. So Democrats can possibly see an opportunity of 2 to 3 seats here, depending if you counted that competitive seat as Republican in the first place, as Gabe Evans is probably dead on arrival this November in the election. So that's where Colorado stands. Now, the next state is California, where California already passed their own proposition, but they might try and go after the remaining Republicans left in the state. Now, for California, this is one of those states where there might not be much room left to draw with, considering they drew out all of the Republicans to the point that there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Republicans left in Republican-leaning districts, and David Valadao, which is a moderate anti-Trump Republican, is represented in a Democrat plus 1 district, and may also be dead on arrival in November. So really, how much farther could Democrats go in the state of California without risking their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 competitive Democrat districts in the state, where this could possibly end up being a dummy mander in a Republican red wave year? So I think this portion of the article here, where Democrats may be planning it, could be true, but the chances of them actually going through with it, especially before 2030, is very, very unlikely, as there is a good chance it could backfire. And the same thing goes for New Jersey, where the legislators and voters would have to approve an amendment to change the state constitution and get rid of its bipartisan redistricting commission. Now, the quote-unquote bipartisan redistricting commission in the state of New Jersey actually gives Democrats a lot of the seats to begin with. You can see that 9 out of the 12 seats in New Jersey are already Democrat-leaning, with the 3 remaining Republican seats being a 50-50 split in New Jersey's 7th, where Thomas Keene Jr. is probably already dead on arrival in November. In a Democrat environment, the chances of him winning is already next to none. But there is a Republican seat here represented by Jeff Van Drew that's only Republican plus 5, and if you were to draw out some Democrat voters out of this New Jersey 10th Democratic vote sink, you can actually see a scenario where this seat can become more competitive, if not Democrat-leaning. But this also runs the risk of creating a bunch of toss-up or competitive Democrat seats if a Republican red wave year were to happen in the future. So the chances of Democrats going anything farther than a 10-2 map is very, very unlikely in my opinion. The most that they'd be able to pick up is probably making that competitive seat incredibly safe for the Democrats, so they can just settle with and be happy with a 10-2 map. Now, this article also mentions the state of Wisconsin, but in the state of Wisconsin, Republicans control the legislature. This is a very toss-up swing state that Republicans have won in recent years. And there is a governor election happening at the end of this year that could decide if there is a Republican or Democrat governor that will be running with the Republican legislator. So the chances of anything being done here in Wisconsin is entirely in the hands of the state's Democrat Supreme Court, which has already signaled that they do not want to get involved with state-level politics or national-level politics in favor of one political party over the other. So I don't really think that there's any hope in Wisconsin being able to do anything before 2030 here. Now, for the last two states in this article that I wanted to talk about is Washington and Oregon, which was notably one of the only two states in the entire country that barely swung toward Donald Trump in 2024, indicating that this is actually a Democrat-leaning and trending state in the near future. So Democrats actually have a chance here. However, in the state of Washington, they have a bipartisan commission, so the chances of anything being done quickly will not be happening for 2026, and possibly may not even happen for 2028. Where it says that Democrats will need a 2/3 majority in both chambers to override their state's commission. So for that to happen, the Democrats will nearly need to get a supermajority in the state of Washington. And even if that were to happen in the state of Washington, we could realistically only see them probably drawing out 1 to 2 Republican seats. As you can see, there's already a Democrat seat here that's competitive, and what they could probably do is draw out these two somewhat competitive Republican seats and make them safe Democrat. So Washington maybe has a chance of picking up 2 seats, but that's also dependent on an incredible Democratic supermajority happening this November on a state level. Now, moving over to Oregon, there's only 1 Republican representative in the state of Oregon. If you go over here to Oregon, you can see that the 1 Republican seat is Republican plus 14. However, that there are 3 competitive Democrat seats here, where the Democrats only have plus 4, plus 6, and plus 6. So if Oregon was to go ahead and try to gerrymander the state, they actually put a total of 4 seats up for grabs in a competitive year, where maybe if Republicans are able to put together a massive red wave in the future, this could end up becoming a dummy mander for some of the more competitive seats. So will Oregon be able to go for a full 6-0 map in the near future? I don't really think that the odds or chances are there because of the risk that it could run, but it could be something possible. Now, the rest of these states aren't really worth mentioning as they are not clear Democrat states. They have split legislators and there isn't a clear path for Democrats to increase. So I won't go over Pennsylvania, Minnesota, or Michigan, but I will try to summarize all of the states we have here. I think out of all the states we have here, we could possibly see a max of 1 coming out of Maryland. The chances of anything being changed in Illinois is also probably a max of 1. Now, New York probably has a max of maybe 1 or 2, but some of those seats are going to go to Democrats anyway. Colorado probably does have the best chance of picking out 2 Republican seats here. And California won't be able to redraw anything here before the next census, as there probably isn't much room left for them to draw. Same thing for New Jersey. Same goes for Wisconsin, that won't do anything. Same goes with Washington because they need a supermajority for the Democrats. And in Oregon, the chances of them creating a dummy mander is pretty high to the point they won't do anything either. So this means that there is probably a safe 3 to maybe 6 seats that Democrats can expect by 2028. And none of these will actually be occurring during the 2026 midterms this year, as a lot of these things require ballot initiatives and years and multiple legislator pass-throughs for this to actually occur. So this Axios article actually shows that Democrats do have a plan to maybe net anywhere from 4 to 6 Democrat seats for the 2028 redistricting to try to counteract the wins that Republicans are having right now in these Republican states. So with that being said, everyone, this sums up my video for today's topic about Democrats' redistricting plans. And I will be uploading more videos daily later this week on all the other redistricting news and to cover some primary elections. If you enjoyed the video, please go down below and hit the subscribe button to make sure that you never miss a video. Alongside that, if you enjoyed the topic, go ahead and leave a like and comment down below about the next topic that you want me to cover in my videos. And with everything being covered in this video, I hope you all enjoyed and I'll see you all later this week. Goodbye.